Hello and welcome to AI4. Our next session is titled, It's Time for Retail to Get Even More Personal. It will be led by Arun and Gopi. Please join me in welcoming them to the virtual stage.
Welcome, everyone. Just as by way of introduction, I'm Arun. I'm a partner with ZS in our Washington, D.C. office. I lead the AI practice area at ZS. I'm joined by my colleague, Gopi, who's an associate principal in the Seattle office, who works extensively on personalization as well. We're very happy to be here and share a little bit of our perspective and our story as it relates to personalization. But before I do that, for those of you who may not be aware, ZS is a 35-year-old firm that focuses on leveraging analytics and data to help drive decision-making. We've been doing this for just about our entire existence. We were founded by two professors from Kellogg who were both operations research professionals. And so we've had this in our DNA, the idea of leveraging data and leveraging analytics to help drive decision-making. Today, we are going to talk specifically about personalization, and our session objectives are fourfold. First is to give you a little bit of the state of the industry as we see it in retail and where we see personalization practices. Two, to perhaps provide a perspective on why we think you need a more tailored approach to be successful in this regard. Three, to give you some advances that we see that have actually been game changers in personalization and our ability of an organization to personalize on a one-on-one basis, and to also share with you a few critical next steps. Now, the way we're going to do this is that what's coming to you is a recording for the first 30 to 35 minutes. And as we go along through this recording, please, we would love to have your questions. So do post these questions to the moderator. And for the remaining or the balance of the session, we'd come back live and we'd love to address the questions and engage with you in conversation and share more of our perspectives. So that's how it's going to work. We'll take a few minutes, we'll walk across these four broad themes, and we will then come back and we'll engage with you in questions in more detail.
Thanks, Arun. And as many of you are experiencing today, retail industry is going through an unprecedented acceleration in terms of consumer adoption and for digital services. When we think about it, if we go back to around 2009, retail in the US was around 5 to 6% in terms of penetration, and over the last 10 years, it grew to close to 16%. But just in the last few months, we have seen the digital adoption jump to around 27%. That's a massive acceleration that the industry is going through, almost a decade's worth of acceleration that has happened in the last 3 to 4 months. In fact, Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, in the last earnings call mentioned that almost 2 to 3 years worth of digital transformation projects have happened in various industry verticals within the last 2 to 3 months. So that's the kind of change that we are seeing in consumer behavior. And one of the key shifts that we see in consumer behavior is that they are now engaging various retail brands through digital channels. Now, for the first time in the last few years, consumers have started interacting with a broader range of brands or digital channels. One of the research surveys showed that almost 75% of US consumers have interacted with a new brand website and through digital and made an online order and made an online purchase. And that gives a unique opportunity during this time of crisis to engage with customers in a meaningful manner, in a personalized manner. A couple of things that we have to keep in view in this is how can brands activate and nurture that digital community that's coming up today, and also what are the kind of experiences, personalized interactions that brands can drive in a virtual manner to be able to capitalize on this change. And some of this is going to be through experiential content, live streaming, and many other mechanisms that are there. The key is to ensure that the brands are able to take advantage of this digital adoption and drive that one-on-one personal engagement with their consumers. And when we think about personalization, the the area itself has evolved quite a bit over the last few years. When we think about the personalization maturity, a few years back, it was all about web content and single message customization. That's where most of the work has happened. As the technology evolved, we have seen more around behavioral recommendations as well as omni-channel optimization that is going on. But the true the big thing that is out there is around predictive personalization. When we think about predictive personalization, as the saying goes, anticipation denotes intelligence, and a lot of times understanding and anticipating the customer needs and then providing the right product offer recommendation to them and the right experience is what is going to drive this revenue potential with the brands. And that's where the next frontier is, where the brands can win, how these customers can be engaged in a digital manner, and incremental growth is achieved. And I'll let my colleague Arun show some of the research around how personalization is driving business growth. Arun, I think you're on mute.
Personalization in a rules-based environment is tough enough. And now you're telling me that I have to think about one-on-one. I have to personalize for you in that for you mode for an individual customer. Oh my God, that takes complexity to an entirely new level. I have to think about data, build the pipelines. I have to think about technology. I have to think about content complexity in new ways. It's a challenging problem. And if a simpler version of this itself was not as easy to execute, is it even worth it for me to strive to do this even more? A more mature version of this? And I think the answer that we've picked, I picked a few statistics that from various sources, okay? And the statistics demonstrate the following. From a customer's perspective, if the personalization is not there, it leads to frustration. If the content is not relevant to me as an individual customer, if it doesn't match my interest, it leads to frustration. So that's the first thing that says it's a necessary condition. Second, if personalization exists, I tend to spend more. I tend to shop more. I tend to favor those brands that actually enable that for me. And third, if a business does present personalization, then the business has the ability to show better performance than those that don't. So from a consumer perspective, if you don't offer it to me, I'm disappointed. If you do offer it to me, I do well. And from a business perspective, if you do offer it, you get better results. So I think this very clearly demonstrates that even if the journey is difficult, it's well worth it and something that organizations should strive for in the retail environment. Now, we talk about tailored AI and why we need tailored AI to drive personalization, right? What's the challenge? The challenge is that as our platforms and our data and our algorithms and structures get more and more sophisticated, it could also be that many of these continue to be fairly generic. They're all built to address broad ranges of solutions across different types of retailers. And if you try to fit your world in a predefined box, it doesn't always work. You'd rather define the box based on what your world looks like, right? What is your intent? What sort of content do you want to deliver? What sort of message? What intervals of time? That matters. And that matters on not just on your intent, but also your maturity. Do you have the ability to be able to develop the data and the technology and the content that we talked about to be able to do that? And last but not least, your analytic prowess. It's one thing to have algorithms that are generic in form, but you need to understand how to apply those algorithms in more real ways so that it can actually work within your environment. So a tailored approach, we think, is really needed. You can use a lot of the building blocks, but you need to define or assemble the building blocks in a way that makes the most sense for your organization and for your purpose and where you find yourself in your personalization journey. So there are two dimensions we often look at when we engage with customers on this. The first dimension is what we call tailored AI, and the second dimension is ease of use. So let me talk a little bit about tailored AI. And of course, as you can see from the star on this page, we are essentially saying you need both. If you really want to drive effective solutions via personalization, strive for both. It's not just good enough to have a tailored AI, which is difficult to use, and you don't want something that's easy to use, but it's very generic. So what do we mean by tailored AI? So a few things. One, that the AI is actually built for purposes of personalization. So understanding what are the constructs that come together in order for a personalization algorithm to come to life. And you have to think about those components and make sure that you're assembling the algorithms to suit that purpose. So that's number one. Number two, if you are going to make decisions based on these algorithms and the recommendations that come from these algorithms, then one must ensure that in fact these are explainable. Okay, and you want to understand why is it that this particular item or this offer is being made to this segment or this particular customer at this time. Understanding that is critical to get buy-in from the organization at large. And then last but not least, this is something that we feel passionate about. There's been this debate about, is AI a feature or is it an architecture? And we believe that you have to think about AI in an architecture approach. So what does that mean? That means that if you take a process that's end-to-end and you take elements of the process and you try to find increased sophistication by using better, more robust techniques to take certain aspects of that process and make them better, that's a feature approach. But if you take the entire process and you say, listen, I can reimagine this given the strength that I have to be able to build feedback mechanisms, feedback loops, to be able to build the data pipelines in clever ways, for me to constantly be experimenting to try to understand what works and what doesn't, that's a distinctly different approach. So we suggest take AI as an architecture approach as opposed to a feature approach. And from an ease of use perspective, you can't go on a personalization journey, have a very clear perspective of what you want, but then takes 2 years to implement. That's not value. You got to find out how you can put something in play quickly and get better over time. That's number one. Number two, it can't be that anytime you think about personalization, suddenly all your marketing tech stack has to be reevaluated or somehow the plumbing has to be reconfigured. That's also a challenge. You have some existing ecosystem of tools and you have to find ways to ensure that your solution fits within that. And last but not least, I think the business and the planning process in every organization is distinct. And for there to be ease of use on something that is a personalization strategy, it must fit within that business and planning process, which doesn't mean that you can't adapt your business and planning processes. Of course, you must, you can, but what solution you're driving has to be, in a way, supported with what exists currently.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And when we think about data and technology, that's truly at the heart of personalization, especially when we're looking at these type of for you engagements. Um, and when we think about the spectrum of data, retailers and brands definitely have very rich information about the customers that are there. The key is to bring all this together and from point of sale, digital activity, and information that's coming from apps as well as other third-party data that is available. Bring it together at a single place and leverage that power to determine what is the best recommendation in terms of the product as well as any rewards that the brands might be doing for these customers. At the same time, given the time that we are living in, it's also important to make sure that the personalization is done in a thoughtful manner and it is not intrusive or kind of the spammy retargeting that happens. So those are definitely things which will destroy the trust of our customers. So personalization, when we think about it, has to be done in a thoughtful manner where you're able to build the trust and comfort with the customers and not in a very intrusive manner. One interesting thing that some of the brands are doing now is being ability to garner inputs from customers, whether it's through virtual stylists or mechanisms through which you are able to get what the customers are wishing for, and being able to take that input from the customers on a dynamic real-time basis and leveraging that along with the data that's available about other customers to deliver these personalized recommendations is going to be really, really key. And getting that data is also a function of having the right technology interface, whether it's in your app or on your website, will determine how well the systems are able to perform. And when we and once you have the data, there are four key AI innovations that come together to be able to drive a personalized experience for customers. First and foremost is ability to do automated feature engineering. And some of you would have done many data science and analytics projects. And when you think about the the life cycle of a data science and analytics project, majority of the time does go into this feature engineering. So the ability to be able to take a business objective and come out with automated features is going to be really important. So taking a business objective, finding every attribute, variable, and a combination thereof, which can impact the business objective, like an attrition or customer churn, or increasing the lifetime value of a customer. These are all business objectives. And for these objectives, what are the features which might be influencing not only at an overall level, but all the way down to segment cohorts or a opportunity level is going to be really critical. And today, when we look at the AI technologies, a combination of techniques, say like an XGBoost in coordination with a genetic algorithm, is able to deliver that kind of speedy results, which can power personalization. Now, once you have these a varied set of features which might be influencing customer behavior, the second key component is to figure out these granular nano cohorts of customers. So which of these features in combination can define a specific customer group, and being able to identify that on a dynamic basis and quantify opportunity on those granular cohorts. And when I say granular cohorts, we're talking about anywhere between 10 people, 20 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, whatever is that similar lookalike group is going to be, that is going to be really important. And this is where AI can again deliver this in a hierarchical manner where there might be some existing business segments that you're already using, but then AI takes all these features that it is discovering and comes up saying that here is a cohort of customers which represent an opportunity against which you can think about certain specific marketing tactics, interventions, and strategies. And that's the second area where we are seeing a lot of innovation happening from an AI standpoint of view. And once you think of having all the business objectives and the features that are driving and the cohorts of opportunity that is there, the third key piece is ability to match what might be millions of items that are in the inventory of the retailer to the customer to say what is that product reward combination which is relevant for the customer, and how can that drive incremental growth for the retailer. That's going to be the key piece. Today, when we look at again some of the innovation that is happening from an AI standpoint of view, graph-based recommendation engines are able to deliver such complex matching, taking these millions of items and offers that might be there, and then finding the exact right fit on what might be relevant for somebody like an Arun or someone else, and delivering that at scale. So one of the very familiar examples in this area is what Pinterest is doing with these graph-based recommendation engines, and deliver some very personalized items on a real-time basis for millions and millions of customers that are going in. Last but not the least, the fourth critical component, and this is also where AI is playing a big role, is on real-time micro-experimentation. So it is really important that whatever recommendations that and experiences that you are suggesting to the customers, the brands need to have a way for customers to react to that. It can be as simple as having a like-dislike, or it could be more elaborate mechanisms where customers are providing feedback to the recommendations that they're receiving. If the customer is able to provide that feedback, then that goes directly back into the AI, and it's then able to do real-time experimentation. For example, customer A might be shown certain items they liked or disliked, and similarly, it is shown to a few other customers. And based on that, AI is then able to change certain aspects of the product recommendation or an offer and show it to a different set of customers to better results. So there are millions of these micro experiments that AI is able to drive on an ongoing basis to deliver results. So these four things on a combined basis are allowing personalization to be delivered at scale to millions of customers. And there is a lot of benefit from a revenue standpoint of view that we are seeing. I'll let my colleague Arun explain some of the next steps that you can take in this space and how that can benefit you.
All right. Thank you, Gopi. So if you do all of this, what happens? I mean, earlier I talked about now customers expect it. I expect Netflix to make good recommendations. I expect Amazon to make good recommendations. I expect Spotify to make good recommendations. So I expect it. And if you are in a position to be able to deliver it, then I think you should be able to see the gains. We talked about that, right? I mean, 80+% of businesses that do provide personalization, in fact, tend to see gains to their business performance. Why does that happen? It happens because you find the right items or the right offers that are personalized to customers who may be in that stage of their journey where it actually fits and drives them to action. That's critical. Okay, and that's one part of it, right? What is it that I'm looking for, and are you able to get it to me at the right time? That's one part of it. The second part of it is that somehow if I'm able to account for behavioral changes or other signals that I give you so that I can test, I send you an offer, I test, as Gopi said, and I learn from it so that I adapt for other customers of that type, that's of value. And if you do these two things, then what can you expect? And what do we see? We see increased average order as appropriate, from customers. That's one. And then we also see this notion of better cross-sell, better conversion, more incremental digital orders, and more from the customers that we tend to target. By the way, I think one thing in personalization is that you can always be thinking, do you personalize for everybody all the time? Do you take a certain subset or a cohort to personalize and just target on those consumers and keep getting better? And of course, I think we feel a more targeted approach is the right thing to do, and that's how you can try to get. And if you do that, then as this page indicates, 15+% is not uncommon, and we've seen it in our experiences. So clearly, the results are there. If you do it, it's not easy to do, but some advances, as Gopi alluded to, actually enable us to do it. Better features, better segments, better mapping elasticity, and last but not least, testing and learning quickly. So what are some steps, right? How do we think about it? Here are a few things that we think are critical. First is, especially post-COVID, organizations have to think more dynamically. So what do we mean? I mean, if I look at just our family, my household, our shopping experiences, lots has changed. I think we are gravitating to brands we can trust. Perhaps we went a little bit broad at first, but then we narrowed it a little bit later on. And we are shopping with folks that we can trust, but also who are delivering certain key personalized messages to us. And so as our preferences are evolving, how do you adapt to our evolving preferences, especially in this sort of volatile environment? So that's the first one, think dynamically. The second is, I think, understand your customers. All of you as retailers, I'm sure, take great pride in being able to understand your customers. So I'm not saying anything that's a foreign concept or something strange to you. Many of you have very sophisticated techniques, perhaps behaviorally, attitudinally, more. You may be using certain latent measures and a lot. And that's great. But specifically in this environment, as it relates to number one, as customer preferences evolve, find ways to keep better track of who your customers are and understand how their preferences are evolving as well too. And that might come from you discovering newer types of data sources, maybe location and other syndicated data sources in this environment that make more sense. Third, I think matching offer to need. So let's say I'm on a certain stage of my journey, then you make an offer based on where I am. If someone is a strong adopter and they're a loyalist and they're on a steep incline to buying more from you, it's a very different offer than somebody who's trying or not yet adopted. So match the offer to the needs and where customers find themselves in their journey. Fourth, test. Always be thinking A/B or even more sophisticated methods and quickly realize what's going on. And of course, if you test and you try a few things, then those feedback mechanisms will give you ability to learn and to adopt. So these are sort of what we see as stages. And then you sort of repeat this on an ongoing basis, and that's how you can get more sophisticated over time. So once again, thank you so much for listening. And at this stage, we are very, very excited to take your questions, and we'll switch to that mode now.